Hi, this is Mrs. Bustamante. Today we're going to talk about cellular respiration and just a little bit about how it relates to photosynthesis. But basically, what is this big process that we're going to call cellular respiration, and why does all living things, plants and animals, why do they have to do this, right? Okay, so what is cellular respiration? What's the big picture? Why do you care? It's basically a process by which organisms take molecules they get broken down from food and they release the chemical energy that are stored in those bonds into more usable energy for the cell. And the energy that gets released from those chemical bonds during cellular respiration is stored in these molecules called ATP. And we know that ATP is used for a form of energy in lots and lots and lots of different processes, which we're going to see in a second, right? But our big point of cellular respiration is to take molecules that store energy in their bonds and break it down into usable energy. That's why all living organisms have to undergo cellular respiration. They have to have a way to take in whatever their food is and make it into more usable molecules. So that usable molecule again is ATP, and it will release energy for cellular metabolic processes, we say. Basically, all these different types of things that the cell has to do in order to function properly. And we've talked a lot about some of these, and some of them we'll talk about later in the year. So we talked about how active transport uses ATP to move molecules against their concentration gradients. We know about it there. Later on, we need ATP in something called protein synthesis, which is how you put together proteins and you get the organism that it is, right? I always tell you that you are a pile of proteins. How do we make those proteins? How do we put them together? When your muscles contract, you need ATP, and we also even saw that you needed ATP in the process of photosynthesis, right? So ATP is really important basically for all parts of, all points at the cell at some level. So what type of organisms undergo cellular respiration? Well, in photosynthesis, we talked a lot about plants. We said plants undergo photosynthesis because plants have chloroplasts, right? They're autotrophs. So they make their own food is what we always hear, right? And their own food is that they make glucose. But heterotrophs also undergo cellular respiration. They can't make their own glucose. We'll talk about that in a second. But both heterotrophs and autotrophs undergo cellular respiration. I think sometimes people forget that plants undergo cellular respiration because we spend so much time with plants talking about chloroplasts and photosynthesis. But this is the part that comes after photosynthesis. So all organisms, plants and heterotrophs, have to undergo cellular respiration. And what's neat about cellular respiration is just how we talked about or just how we do talk about the simple equation of photosynthesis, it's kind of like the reverse. Okay, so the simple equation for cellular respiration is that you start with glucose and you start with oxygen, and through some reactions, you're going to get out water and energy. The energy you're going to get out comes in the form of ATP, and you're going to get a molecule called carbon dioxide. And when you compare this to the equation of photosynthesis, you'll notice that the products of cellular respiration are used as what we call reactants in photosynthesis. So water and carbon dioxide and energy from the sun in the equation of photosynthesis combine to make glucose and oxygen. So when we put these two processes together, we see kind of a loop, right? Photosynthesis only happens in plants. It happens in the chloroplasts of plants, right? There's your sunlight energy. But your main products from it are oxygen and glucose. So what do we do with those? Well, those can go on to the mitochondria, where we're going to talk about cellular respiration happening. And through the process of cellular respiration, we're going to give off carbon dioxide and water, which then can be used by the plants again. So these two processes go hand in hand, and they're kind of, sometimes you'll hear them called a representative cycle because they go back and forth. And yes, you should know the equation for cellular respiration, but we'll talk about it a lot. So we just said that photosynthesis and cellular respiration, right? They make this nice little loop. The products of photosynthesis, glucose and oxygen, get used by the mitochondria in the process of cellular respiration. Cellular respiration gives off carbon dioxide and water. It goes to the chloroplast and gets used again. But what if you aren't a plant, right? How do you do cellular respiration if you aren't a plant? Well, you eat and you breathe, okay? You eat in different molecules, some of those molecules being glucose, right? And you breathe in air, and in that air that we breathe in, there's oxygen. So we skip this step of photosynthesis if we're a heterotroph, right? And we take in oxygen and glucose in other forms, typically by breathing and by eating.